Okay, I have just one question today. What does it mean to be authentic? We hear that word all the time, but what does it really mean? Have you really thought about it? Okay, hey again, I'm Brian Raison again with the OSU Extension Leadership Series, and today I'm not on campus. Well, I'm actually on a different campus. I'm at Wright State University, beautiful place down here just north of Dayton, and I was for other meetings. I thought I'd shoot a quick video here on our leadership series. This is the second one with the emotional intelligence, adding in the authentic leadership construct. And so let's talk about that today and see how they work together and see how they overlap. What I want to do is I just want to quickly reiterate the emotional intelligence that we talked about last time, that basic definition. It's always good for me to remember those things, and you as well, I think. And then talk about the theoretical construct of this authenticity in leadership. What does it mean, and how are those two things connected? So I think I asked this question the last time. Have you read about EQ? Have you studied EI, emotional intelligence, or emotional quotient? Can you give me that theoretical definition? And again, don't worry, that's what I ask my graduate students. Today, I'll give you the definition and we'll talk through it. So just as the reminder, it's how do we recognize our own and the emotions of others? How do we discriminate those different feelings? But mostly, and this is what I really try to key in on, how do we use that emotional information to guide our thinking and behavior? To me, that's the critical step. Think about the E plus R equals O, and we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. That formula that takes 10 seconds to memorize, but a lifetime to master. The event happens, how do you respond to get the right outcome that you really want? So, emotional intelligence, other ways to be smart. That's kind of the synthesis of the construct. I really like that. How, if we better know our feelings, then they can help us make better decisions, motivate ourselves and others, find that empathy, be positive, encourage. We can really get the job done. These are the meaningful outcomes of this idea of emotional intelligence. The 5 constructs, or the 5 pieces of it, as Goleman, who did most of the seminal work on this, was that self-awareness and regulation, that motivation. Remember the internal and external, intrinsic, extrinsic motivators, the empathy, and then the social skills. Just really quickly for the reminder, again, if we know our strengths and our limitations better, then we can make better decisions. We can have better interactions. And we do some of those by the Myers-Briggs, taking the self-assessments, doing the Harvard implicit bias, all those different things that you can do to really help yourself kind of know yourself better. The DISC profile, I've done a lot of those. And they're not explicitly right or wrong, but they give you information, and that's always helpful. The self-regulation, how do you control the events, moods, impulses, E plus R equals O. Your motivation, driven to achieve beyond the expectations. How do you do that for yourself? How do you do it for others? Then the empathy, beyond the sympathy of just feeling sorry for or about something, but actually kind of being in their shoes and feeling with. It's that deeper relationship, that deeper level of understanding and of care. And then finally, putting it all together in the social skills. These make up that emotional quotient. And if you remember the main thing about this, well, I always ask the question, are you any good at that? Am I? Yeah, sometimes I'm better at some parts than others. And so we all need a little bit of practice, and that's okay. But the main thing that I always like to remind students is that you can learn this. This isn't fixed like your intelligence quotients, they say, it's a pretty fixed thing. But the EQ can actually be increased. It can be learned. You read about it, you study it, observe others. But mostly, practice. Engage your brain, that executive side, that executive functioning. So, what's authentic leadership? What does that mean? What is the theory, what do the theoretical constructs say about this thing of being authentic in our leadership? It sounds kind of wishy-washy a little bit, maybe. Well, there's 3 perspectives, so let's look at those and see if this helps solidify it a little bit. First, the intrapersonal. So here the focus is on the leader's self-knowledge, self-regulation, self-concept, that leadership from conviction, from the meaning, using the experiences and the meaning from those experiences to lead. Sounds a bit like EQ, of course, because they overlap pretty significantly. That interpersonal process. So now think about this authenticity coming from a relationship where the leader affects the followers, but the followers also affect the leaders. And it's that interaction, it's that reciprocity norm that really plays into this idea here. And then finally, the developmental perspective, that it can be nurtured. It's not just a fixed trait. And it may well develop as the result of some sort of a major life event, a severe illness or a new career. And again, very similar to EQ. it can be raised, it can change as you go through life and experience and learn different things. So the practical approach, I really like boiling things down. That's sort of where I live, at that leadership theory and practice, those intersections. So practically, it asks two questions. What's going on? What are we going to do about it? I love that because it just boils it down to really action and leadership, and that's what I always want to get to, particularly when I'm working with groups and doing coaching and mentoring. So criticisms, I always like to throw those out. And one of the main ones says, it's unclear how this authentic leadership results in more positive organizational outcomes. Yeah, because it is a little wishy-washy. I'm okay with that. But as I asked with EQ and that construct, I said, if you apply these processes, if you work on developing yourself in these ways, what's the outcome going to be? Are you going to be more effective? Are you going to be more successful? Is your team, your organization? The answer on that, I think, is pretty clear. So, can you think of an authentic leader today? Can you think of someone who really leads from their conviction, who is pretty genuine, day in and day out, regardless of what's happening? They are kind of that even keel. What specifically does he or she do to help them to maintain that? Well, again, back to Tim Kite, he and his brother Brian with Focus 3. They do the consulting with the OSU Buckeyes, Urban Meyer and Company. And again, they throw out this really simple formula. It's our response, the R factor, when some event happens, whatever it may be, that changes the outcomes. And that's the critical piece that we need to think about. So when Brian and Tim talk about this, they ask the key question: what does this situation require of me? That's the number one thing. So if you pause and engage your executive brain and answer above the line, then you've got that intentional, on-purpose, skillful result or the outcome. Or if you go with the emotional, again, controlling your emotional quotient, that intelligence, then it's a reaction and a totally different outcome. Brian and Tim talk about that, how leaders control the culture, or set the culture drives the behavior, and then it's the behavior that produces the results, whatever your team's looking to do. And so how can authenticity play into driving the cultural change or the positive cultural change, which will in turn then push the behavior to get to the results you're looking for? How might that play? I can imagine 100 scenarios in my head, depending on your organization, what you're doing. I'm sure you can as well. One of the key things that Tim talks about thinking about is that job requirements or working with people, we really only see this minimum amount up on top, just like the old iceberg. We've all seen this forever. There's a really small amount of stuff that we can see, but the underlying, that's the more powerful, the deeper, the things that we really have to be aware of. And if you look at those, self-awareness, self-regulation, those are your EQ, those are your authenticity measures. And so putting those into play can help you either avoid the iceberg or work with it, work with those small number of things that you see, because you have a deeper understanding. And that, again, is one of the key. So putting it all together, emotional intelligence, authentic leadership, what do they look like? How do they connect? When I think about applying EI and knowing yourself to leadership and decision making in order to be more authentic, more transparent. Transparency is another kind of concept or construct I didn't really talk about, but it goes right hand in hand with authenticity and leadership and thinking about it. I usually think about authenticity as the internal driver of me being me, and then the transparency piece that falls right along with it, but it's more the external things of what people see, or having the kind of open books, quote unquote, things like that. And those can play together and be very powerful in getting work done and in leading a team. So again, I think about the theory and the practice and where those two things intersect. And if you can kind of live there, or attempt to live at that intersection, then I think it's a really powerful place to get work done. And I love that idea. So that's it for Authenticity today. Thanks so much for listening, and hope you tune in to the next leadership series. Talk to you soon.